A new survey of Republican voters paints a picture of a new conservative electorate. The poll conducted by the American Compass and YouGov found that GOP voters have abandoned the traditional Republican Party focus on tax cuts, deregulation, and free trade to focus more on the new right's worker-first framing of key economic challenges to the old right's business-friendly approach.
And when it comes to top issues among conservatives, transgender activism tops the chart at 69%, followed by woke corporations at 62%, illegal immigration at 60%, critical race theory at 52%, and globalization at 50%.
Here with us to break this down and more is Executive Director of American Compass, Oren. Oren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with those numbers that Jessica mentioned on cultural issues. I was kind of surprised, honestly, to see them so high. I think we're kind of told quite often, especially on the conservative side, that these are issues for the very online right and maybe don't resonate as much with voters in the real world. But here we see that perhaps that's not true. I wonder if you could speak to that perception and why these issues are so popular among conservative voters. And I'm also curious on if you are concerned at all that these might alienate the middle.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we think there are two things going on. You know, one is that this is clearly an area of focus for a lot of voters. The idea that this is just some fringe issue or, you know, something the media is whipping up isn't the case. We found that this is something that voters were focused on, frankly, however you cut the data. Even if you pick some other issue and ask, you know, okay, of voters who are focused on tax rates, what else do they care about? They also all care about these cultural issues. So they definitely can't be written off. That being said, I think the second thing we found that's really interesting is that they register so highly on a survey like this because they are the area of consensus. That is, whatever type of Republican you're talking to, they all feel the same way about this set of issues. Whereas if you want to ask them which economic issues they care about, at this point, you see a real split. You see some who are focused on those old taxes, regulation, free trade type issues, and some who are focused on a much newer set of issues, workers, families, and so forth. And so the responses on those other issues just get kind of spread out and watered down. If you actually zoom in on a chunk of voters, if you say, okay, you know, of these new right voters who are focused on these newer issues, what do they care about? Well, then you see that those new issues, they're right up there with the cultural issues. If you focus on just those old voters and say, what do they care about? Well, those old issues are right up there with the cultural issues, but it all gets watered down because there's so much disagreement within the party right now.
Oren, I'm curious about the methodology of the poll in the survey here. Were those who were polled given a definition of transgender activism or woke corporation? And was this a list that you all made that was predisposed given to the survey takers? Was it open-ended? What was the methodology there?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, we ended up whittling it down to a set of 12 issues that we wanted to present. I think it's always a challenge. Like you could list hundreds of issues. What we tried to do was pick a representative set across these different kind of categories that people are thinking about. And so, for instance, on the cultural issues, the three options we provided were, you know, one was transgender activists are trying to erase the difference between boys and girls. One was woke corporations are forcing their values on Americans. And so those were the terms that the respondents saw that then get shortened in the chart to just, you know, transgender activism or woke corporations. And so, you know, we emphasize in the poll, right in the question, we said, look, obviously there are lots of issues. You might care more about other things that aren't here. You might think some of the things here aren't the ones that are important, but just of these ones that are presented, which do you see as the top challenges? And there were 12 options, and respondents could choose anywhere from 2 to 5. And so, you know, we don't think it necessarily is a comprehensive look at every issue, but it's a pretty good snapshot of how voters are feeling across the different types of issues that are getting brought up a lot.
I think what struck me most about this survey, Oren, is that these issues that have been identified as top issues among voters, particularly in terms of the economic vision from the new right, are things that organizations like American Compass have been talking about for years now, and yet Republican leadership is still kind of focused on the lower taxes, smaller government, free trade side of this. And this was not shown more perfectly than in this last GOP debate. In this survey, you find that 41% of these voters believe that unions are a positive force, which is pretty stunning, as American Compass points out, for what is traditionally a pro-right-to-work party. And yet on that GOP debate stage, you heard a lot of those people really downplay the concerns of the workers in the UAW strike. Tim Scott, for example, suggested that he would fire people who go on strike, and tried to dodge when he was asked about it. So why do you think the party apparatus is so slow to react to this changing ideology among the voters?
Well, I think any party apparatus typically operates within a bubble to some extent. On the right, people like to poke fun at the left and say, look at these progressive politicians who are only listening to the progressive activists and cooking up this stuff that's disconnected from what the country wants. The dynamic's a little different on the right, but in some ways it's similar. You have elected officials who are listening to a small set of professional consultants who hear a lot from donors. And what they hear as and assume to be the message, plus what they themselves grew up with in prior decades, is just in a lot of cases different from where the country and even the Republican Party is right now. And, it's been very funny to watch the reaction to this survey online and actually have a lot of folks who still want to defend the more old right views. They get very upset at the way we worded the questions. A great example of this is we tested whether or not, voters think a tight labor market is a good thing and we should tell employers they have to go pay workers more, or is a labor shortage a bad thing and we should consider higher immigration to fill jobs. And people got very upset about this. They said, that's outrageous. Of course, voters aren't going to choose labor shortages are bad and we need more immigration. I agree. Of course, voters aren't going to choose that, but that has been the exact message from huge swaths of the party, certainly of the business lobby, of a lot of the think tanks on the right of center. And so, the fact that people are getting upset that we're just actually presenting what people are saying and showing that voters just do not want to hear it anymore, I think is really important and will hopefully be helpful in piercing that bubble a little bit.
So this is a poll that YouGov has conducted with similar questions time and again. What do you make of the trends and the changes in responses among those who were polled, among the voters? Specifically, earlier YouGov found on the transgender issue that someone who knew someone who was transgender had a member of their community that was transgender, they were more likely to say that discrimination against those who are transgender is more of a problem. Now, have you seen any trends change? And if so, what do you credit that to? Is it media coverage? Is it sort of more organic grassroots changing of beliefs? Can you just briefly describe what you make of the trends and what you credit those to?
Well, I think a lot comes down to, in some of these cases, what you're actually asking people. And so, for instance, there's nothing inconsistent about thinking it's a problem that transgender activists are eliminating the difference between boys and girls, and also being concerned if transgender people in your own life who are being discriminated against. It's perfectly possible for somebody to hold both of those ideas in their head at the same time. And I think a lot of what happens with the polling that gets done generally, this is the first time we've developed a set of questions like this to do with YouGov. I think something that American Compass tends to do particularly well is pose the questions in the way that they actually flow through into public policy debates. So, for instance, you'll often see, oh, well, voters choose jobs in the economy as their top issue, right? Well, that's fine. We didn't even offer jobs in the economy as an option, because what are you going to do with that? What does that mean? The question is, what are the actual challenges that people see in their lives that are going to connect in a meaningful way to the kinds of things that politicians might be talking about? And so that's how we tried to present the set of issues that voters could choose between. And then when you dive into, okay, what do you think about a particular issue? We always try to provide a good explanation. Look, some people say this, other people say that. Which is closer to your own view? And I think that's really helpful both in just understanding what the American people think and want. And I think it's really helpful to politicians to help them understand, as you try to think about what good policy is and how to talk about it, what is it that voters are focused on? And I think that's what you really see come through in our results, whether it's on, really openness to unions, whether it's being quite critical and skeptical of Wall Street. You see that GOP voters just are not interested in the sort of dogmatic talking points that have been repeated over and over again for decades. The problems in America right now are different, and what we really emphasize is it's the leaders who figure that out and figure out how to talk about it, how to address those issues, how to build a coalition around it. Those are going to be the leaders who are successful.
You alluded to some of the online chatter. Sorry, Jessica, go ahead with your follow-up.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Was it that you didn't include jobs in the economy because that wasn't an issue you felt a candidate could have a policy platform around or propose policies to improve jobs in the economy?
No, every candidate has, excuse me, a position on jobs in the economy. The problem is that when you list jobs in the economy as the issue, it's just too generic and vague. It doesn't tell you anything about what actually people are thinking about or care about or want to see done. And so we try to focus on actual concrete challenges. When you say you care about jobs in the economy, does that mean you think tax rates on businesses are too high, or does that mean you think too many jobs are being moved to China? Those might both fall under jobs in the economy, but it's not helpful to anybody to say, well, they said jobs in the economy. What's helpful is to understand what are the things going on in the world that are influencing the jobs in the economy, and that you would want to see politicians focused on.
You alluded to some of the online chatter surrounding this poll, and I saw specifically some people suggesting that the questions about reshoring manufacturing and the questions on cultural issues and the responses were proof that the new right is really just focused on xenophobia and racism and being more outrightly bigoted. And I just very briefly, because we're almost out of time, I just wanted to get your response to those accusations.
Yeah, I don't think the survey supports that at all. If you look, let's say, at the new right as a group of voters, you see actually they put greater weight on issues of globalization and immigration and worker power than they do on that set of cultural issues. I think there's, ever since Trump sort of appeared on the scene, been this effort to say, like, well, if you care about losing jobs to China or you care about illegal immigration, that must be because you're racist. But frankly, that's ludicrous. People care about losing jobs to China or losing jobs to anywhere because you've lost the jobs. People care about illegal immigration because it's illegal and because it causes real problems, particularly at the lower end of the labor market. So, I think anyone who writes that off as racism is frankly writing themselves off as relevant to the political conversation in this country. And it's going to be the politicians who take it seriously and talk about how to address it that actually help move the country forward.
All right, Oren Cass with American Compass, thanks for joining us on Rising.
Thanks for having me.